never made it to the western part of the world, only stayed with Byzantium, and therefore depicting of Jesus was, kind of forbidden at some point.
Got it.
Got it.
Welcome to my talk on Artemisia. She was certainly a powerful woman, and Zach likes to call this powerful women. I like to call it scandalous queens. She wasn't a queen, she was definitely a woman, oh boy, in the world of art during her lifetime. Her paintings have recently been most enthusiastically rediscovered, though they have always hung on the walls of major museums throughout the world, both for their own merits and as an example of what a strong and talented woman could accomplish in 1652. So either she was alive or somebody forged it. So we don't really know when she died. She was Orazio's first child, and she was followed by 3 brothers. Her mother died when she was 7 years old. Yeah. And anything pertinent is also covered, which is, I guess, a good thing. If
just
you want.
just barely though, Jane.
Yeah.
Jane, just so that we historically put this on the map. And maybe this sounds, not very intelligent, but did Renaissance come to Italy basically later than it came to Netherlands and Dutch, or this is kind of happening at the same time? Or the Renaissance would be a stretched notion for a couple of centuries, so to speak.
Italy is the first. Italy is the first where Renaissance came from. That came into Italy. That's the first country.
Right.
What do you think?
But if you looked at painting, you have the Northern School. You have people like Van Eyck, Campen, and
because those tended to have a lot of various dimensions in the actual architecture. This one seems more on a flat surface, but I can't tell for sure. But the perspective is really great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have no idea if it was made on a flat surface and then put up, but I don't think they painted it on the ceiling from word go. But I could be wrong, who knows? Anyhow, so we're going to how did they end up? Yes, it would have to be. If the other one was, it would have to be.
You need a spotlight, a very intense one, to do this.
Yeah. And it's amazing how they come.
Yeah.
Okay, for those people who might have no idea what I'm talking about, and there aren't any here, there's minimal distortion. The most obvious innovation is the extreme contrast in lighting. The subjects are engaged in doing something dramatic.
This is among the more violent of all of them. So, in some of them, they're positively fastidious.
Yes, we'll get on to that too. Okay, because, well, first, these are 2 self-portraits of Caravaggio, and the one on the left, the resemblance to Holofernes' head has been noted by many. They could be right. The portraits are separated in time, but not by much. Caravaggio died in 1610 at the age of 39. He was great friends with Artemisia's father, Orazio, and Artemisia, of course, knew him as well. The 2 men even spent time together in prison for the arrival of another artist named Baglioni and his wife. And we went into that in the scurrilous verses. Caravaggio, being a rough guy whose reputation for violence and other sins eventually got him excommunicated and exiled from Rome and faded. And it was a famous feature of her later paintings. Its presence brought a higher price, but in her letters she complained bitterly about the cost. Artemisia passed the worst years of her life between 1610 and 1612. Her mother had died when she was 12 years old. An older woman named Tuzia had been brought in by Orazio to help take care of her three brothers while she was working for her father in the studio. And this is Tassi. Among Orazio's friends was Agostino Tassi. He was a painter of considerable standing in Rome himself, despite a history including several well-deserved incarcerations. And you will read that variously that he was merely an assistant to the studio, or he was there to tutor her or something. But I'm going to show his work in about 10 seconds, so you'll be able to judge for yourself. In 1610, he was 32 years old and already had his own studio and a large number of patrons, not patients. And so let's go on with some of his work. And you can tell it's amazing, right? Here's another one. And you can see the mix of the seascape and the people, and all this architecture is made up out of his head, doesn't exist. And here's a whole bunch of other ones. And I'll leave up for a few minutes so you can. There's a haunting mixture of stark but imposing architecture, mixed with landscape and seascape, dwarfing the tiny humans who inhabit this alien world. And the blend of this is called, it has a name, it's called Capriccio. If we look back at Artemisia's in 1626, there we go. The picture in the upper left is a little reminiscent of Tassi's work, maybe, or maybe it's just a plain landscape. But if it was like Tassi's work, maybe one that she'd seen, is Venus dreaming of this? I was far different from these early canvases. The last one is dated 1652, shortly before she died. The dark color is now popular. I think that was due to the influence of Rembrandt. But more important, this Susanna shows defiance and strength. There is a direct line between her gaze and that of the men. Susanna is confronting her accusers. Susanna paintings did wonders for Artemisia's career. Nobody beyond Rome knew anything about the rape, or if they knew, they didn't care. But it was common gossip there. So she and Pier Antonio left Rome as soon as they were married and took up residence in Florence, still very much a center of the world of art. Pier Antonio's family lived there, and the couple moved in with them while Pier Antonio organized a retrospective exhibit of her work. The exhibit attracted a fine crowd, including Cosimo II da Medici, Grand Duke of Tuscany, and Galileo, who had been the Duke's tutor and was now his court mathematician, a salaried position that allowed him to research while exempting him from teaching. Both men attended the exhibit, along with many other notables from Florentine aristocracy. Despite the attendance of Pier Antonio's messy clan, with noisy kids included over Artemisia's protests, the exhibit produced a commission from the Grand Duke, a Judith and Holofernes to be newly painted, purchase of woman playing the lute, which I think I have. Yes, that's his. There were a lot of women playing the lute by her. This is the one from the Medici collection. Of course, other notables followed suit, and Artemisia's studio was securely established in Florence. The Grand Duke continued to order Artemisia's painting, but eventually a rift developed as he stopped paying for them. There was a legal question about an advance he's given her and his objection to the finished work. Another painting was paid for but not finished. Meanwhile, Orazio faced assorted problems in Rome. Tassi and his friends made life as difficult for him as possible in revenge for bringing the complaint against the rapist. Reports about Artemisia's successes in Florence were trickling in, along with invidious comments about Orazio's work. compared to hers. One critic was quoted as simply saying, "He cannot draw." Well, I don't know. I think he could. What Orazio couldn't do was make a living in Rome anymore. Although he and Artemisia had been estranged since the trial and his hastily arranged marriage of her to a man she didn't love, he came to Florence. As a woman applying for membership in the Accademia di Disegno, she needed her father's permission. He needed a roof over his head and her connections. Her application, that of the only female to apply so far, was successful. In 1650, she was commissioned to contribute a painting to the ceiling of the Casa Buonarroti, which Michelangelo Buonarroti, the younger, was building as a tribute to his uncle, the famous one. This is the result. Each contribution, all from different artists, was to celebrate one of the characteristics of Michelangelo the Great. Artemisia's is a tribute to his innate gift. In 1618, Artemisia began an affair with Francesco Maria Maringhi, a wealthy Florentine who lives at the Palazzo Frescobaldi in the very best part of the city. Artemisia rented for herself an apartment on the Piazza Frescobaldi nearby the Palazzo. Stiatesi continued to marry her affairs, on which his own income was dependent. Artemisia had every reason in the world to have a place of her own. The Stiatesi clan, all of which lived with the couple, was large and noisy. Her spouse was reluctant to move, but there is no question, based on her letters, that she was romantically involved with Maringhi. He had asked that she address letters to him as Fortunio Fortuni, and this is one of them. Perhaps this was to deflect any curiosity of his wife if he had one. She isn't mentioned in the correspondence. I mean, a wife isn't mentioned in the correspondence to my knowledge. My heart, I have received from your lordship one of those letters that are my comfort and bring me back from death to life. And were you aware of the joy that I feel, I am sure it is true that you love me, you would equally feel joy. Your lordship, please forgive me for the rest. If you're sensitive to this kind of thing, cover your ears. Tells me that you know no other woman besides your right hand, envied by me so much, for it possesses that which I cannot possess myself. And then you thank me for having offered you my house. Oh, my dear life, you do me wrong, as you know well that I am yours so long as I still draw breath. The only thing that destroys me is not seeing you near me, and rest assured that I await you as one awaits God's grace, and I'm resolved not to engage in that pursuit, except with you. And if you do not come, I will never ever want to break my celibacy. But I leave you, my soul, to think about the state I am in. I cannot control my feelings in my heart when I receive letters from you. I have held fast so far, but find heart to say heart for the future. I will urge you with all my heart not to use that portrait of mine doing that impossible thing that, remember, you promised not to do, but which perhaps your lordship does. I would only remind you that it is a great sin, and I want you to remember that I love your soul as much as your body. So, my darling, thank me if you love me. Nothing more to say, and God preserve you on this day. Completely holy, your lordship, and Artemisia Lomi, that was part of the name. That letter is different from most of the others that have been found. Most of the letters contain pleas for cash. The Stiatesi's exit from Florence was untidy. The Grand Duke was becoming more and more impatient to receive a painting for which he'd given Artemisia a deposit that was disputed, and about which she makes excuse after excuse. The unreliable and expensive nude female models, who were probably prostitutes, the need to repaint a section and so forth. She reminds them several times that the painting includes 8 human beings and 2 dogs. There was no question of returning the deposit. Partly due to Pier Antonio's excesses, the two of them were running out of money. and drifting into debts they couldn't pay. Finally, they sneaked out of Florence, abandoning Artemisia's love nest and everything inside it. Back in Rome, both Artemisia and Pier Antonio importuned Maringhi to collect their possessions, for which they'd given him a power of attorney. But if they ever received anything, it isn't in the correspondence. And in a later letter, she mentions it's been sold. Maringhi became slow to answer letters, and despite his occasional assurances that he still loved her, it was obvious that he was cooling now that she was less convenient. Rome brought more sorrow. Artemisia's sole surviving boy, Cristoforo, died. His three brothers had died in infancy, possibly because of the plague that was still affecting Rome. Sciatesi wrote that he thought she would die herself. Artemisia's brothers were young men now, and they fought with her constantly, one of them even to the point of drawing a sword against her. Fortunately, Orazio stepped in and prevented the homicide. Maria was finding the constant demands oppressive. Still, she fainted. And I will spare you her next letter, which in part I read. She goes, it's to say, comfort in my life. I'm sorry you were put to such trouble on my account. I was unable to come to a solution such that my possessions do not have to be sold. But I have been left with nothing. I shall remain here living like a hermit. I now see that fortune has turned my back on me as she is robbing me of all things dear and useful to me. And for proof, consider that God has taken my son away from me. It is now 5 days since he died, and I have been dying of grief. It has occurred to me that the love your lordship felt so strongly for me is beginning to leave you. You only send me 2 lines. If you love me, it will never finish. Farewell. To my mind, that letter has a kind of strange ordering of her misfortunes. Cristoforo's death is cited, almost casually, compared to her loss of Maringhi's love and her possessions. Well, there had been precious little love in her life so far. In 1630, Artemisia put Rome and Florence behind her forever and joined the flourishing community of artists in Naples. For the first time, she collaborated on paintings with other artists, particularly Massimo Scanzione, who became a close personal friend, maybe more. She may have picked up the darker aura of her later works. Let's get there. From him, here is one of their canvases. It's heavy on symbolism as well as darkness. Note the hand pointing to the sacrifice of the Lamb of God, which hope for the crucifixion. The artists in Naples learned from one another, and Artemisia found enough commissions to live well as a single mother of a single child. She taught her daughter, named Prudencia for her mother, but called Palmira, to paint as well. She was even invited at last to paint for a religious institution and contributed the birth of St. John the Baptist to the hermitage of that saint. Orazio had been journeying also, finding what he probably thought would be a permanent home in the court of Charles I. Probably so to justify Orazio, Charles invited Artemisia to the court, and she joined him in 1638. Father and daughter had very little time together because Orazio died in the following year. She stayed on until 1642 and the start of the Civil War, when she returned to Naples in the sponsorship of the famous collector, Don Antonio Ruffo. And let us get to that. That's not Ruffo. I recognize him anywhere. Ruffo, a Sicilian politician of note, had a network of friends throughout Europe that surely must have been useful to Artemisia. He also commissioned a bunch of paintings, the most famous of which is Rembrandt's Aristotle, contemplating the bust of Homer, which you can now see at the Met. And so finally, here he is. Did she find love at last? Well, I hope so. She can change until 1652. As I said, nobody's quite sure when she died, and the paintings aren't reliable. And in 1656, there was plague again in Naples. This is one of her last canvases, dated 1651, and I just love it. And that's the end of my talk. Any comments?
Thank you.
Okay. Well, if not, I shall depart and go try to soothe my throat.
Thank you, Jane. That was informative, and several people have put some further references in the chat.
Oh, I'd like to see that.
Yeah, can you bring up your chat?
Yep.
Okay, there's several of them.
Oh,
One's from the New Yorker, one's from the Guardian, and I think one is a reference to a meetup presentation.
oh.
You know, let me unmute everybody. Jane, I'm sorry. Is there more? I can unmute everybody for comments.
Uh-huh.
Do you want me to unmute everybody for comments and questions? Jane,
What?
do you want me to unmute everybody?
Oh, is everybody muted? Oh,
Yeah,
please,
yeah,
unmute.
Okay. Let me do that right now. Sorry.
Okay, any comments now?
Ask all to unmute. I just did. So you can unmute yourself if you have a question. The best action is just to ask a question. We're kind of like a friendly group here. Just be respectful, stuff like that. Go ahead.
Who, me? Make a question?
Abra had she had a meetup presentation. What presentation is from? Miss Cohen? Abra? Hello?
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 I am unmuted. I'm sorry, it's Mr.
Miss-
If it makes any difference. The posting was to this presentation.
Oh, okay.
I just added some references.
I see.
My initial comment was that Artemisia was the most important artist that no one has ever heard of.
Yes.
I wouldn't say nobody, because obviously you're well familiar with her, but I had never heard of her. And I asked several people with a background in art history, graphic designers, people who you would think would know, who had never heard of her. And we're quite amazed that we have such a fascinating story and such fascinating work. So it was a brilliant presentation. Thank you very much.
Now,
Thank you.
quick question, Abra. Why do you think that people would because they would know about Caravaggio and the Renaissance? Is that why you think that way?
Well, the reason I think she's unknown is because the history of art has been written by men, and she has simply been dismissed as many women in history have been erased.
Correct. I understand. Yep.
That's my opinion. Yeah.
As I've been telling Jane, we usually switcheroo between ancient powerful women to modern powerful women to Renaissance, and go back and forth. There was this one, obviously, we'll call her, let's just say, powerful pharaoh wife, Hatshepsut, that I think her image has been erased from Egyptian due to her husband and her basically being reformers. But you could see a lot of the faces have cheap noses or complete faces defaced, so to speak. So it could be both had to do with the fact that she was a lady, or has to do with the husband being reformist. So we don't really know. But in this case, you're absolutely correct. And go ahead.
I think that also it has to do with style. Caravaggio's name is inscribed in every art book and every art history class that you take, and you know that gives everybody a good idea of the period, and people don't want to see a lot of it. Orazio has also gone down the drain. His work is all over the place.
The same rule that applied to Andy Warhol applied to these artists is if you could shock and scandalize, you would become rich and famous, beginning with Caravaggio.
Right, but he's scandalized from a male perspective, and Artemisia was, I thought she was pretty effective at conveying a more feminine perspective on the same stories.
You think the murders of Holofernes were feminine?
No, I think that she portrayed feminine rage in that case much better than Caravaggio did. Caravaggio, there was a certain passivity and a distancing of the women from the actual act. I think that what I mean by the feminine rage, the feeling, that the anger about it came through in her perspective, and I think that my sense would be that may have been off-putting to some men.
Well,
I mean, because part of the constant theme in many patriarchal cultures and belief systems is that the female is the dangerous one, and anything that reminds them of that, I think, would be a little off-putting.
Well, I think this was also against the background of Neoplatonism and the Renaissance, where the feminine principle was greatly valued.
Right, but I think you mean the feminine principle as perceived by men, as opposed to the feminine principle as experienced by women, is the distinction I'm trying to make.
That may well be.
Yeah.
But
I don't know if I was saying it properly, but that's
I think he's being a little bit cynical in saying that for an artist to succeed in these days, he had to be an object of controversy. And Caravaggio is famous for having some of his paintings rejected because they were too lascivious. And that's just raised the price on the other ones.
Right. Did you mean that? I didn't hear you well. Did you mean that I was being cynical?
No, I was.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. All right. Yeah, I'm not as focused on that. I mean, I love some of Caravaggio's stuff, but I'm not necessarily all of it. But I definitely am aware of a very different emotional sensibility as I look at Artemisia's renderings.
I have one more. Never made it to the western part of the world, only stayed with Byzantium, and therefore depicting of Jesus was, kind of forbidden at some point.
Keep it up, but from time to time I have to move a bit.
Yeah.
Okay, and this is, of course, you asked, here is the painting from which it is taken. And this is probably her most famous painting, has been noted by many. They could be right. The portraits are separated in time, but not by much. Caravaggio died in 1610 at Rome. Caravaggio was the most famous painter of his time, and he did a lot of amazing canvases, one of which we just saw, but this is not. He just looks exhausted, and they are kind of protecting him in a way, but pointing to the new world to come and the new population.
Yeah.
I mean, he's in a state of deshabille in the lower half, but he's exhausted and covered in the upper half, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Bontevida, and they're contemporary with Masaccio in Florence. So it's very beautiful.
It's the dialogue and the geographic expansion of the dialogue. This particular slide, now don't get me wrong, Caravaggio was the most famous painter of his time, and he did a lot of amazing canvases, one of which. Whereas in Caravaggio's work, the other character just fills up a space on the canvas and is watching something, which she looks rather dismayed.
If you look at Judith's expression.
I look at her expression. No, don't get.
Yeah, I think that was part of that really rigid fatalistic Calvinism.
Was 10 years dead. Is it possible that before Caravaggio's exile in 1606, the 13 or 14 years, something dramatic? There was a strong sense of motion. The artist who painted this picture was Michelangelo di Caravaggio.
There's completely different suggestion of one seems very protective, the other one seems almost wanton.
Well, I mean, it's not like Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel. It's
No, but the perspective issue is, it's in some.
Mind if you look at Judith's expression.
I look at her expression. No, don't get. Well, maybe I should go on a little bit.
Yeah,
I think,
sorry, Jane. You shouldn't have invited us.
oh no, please. And it is Judith saving Bethulia from the Babylonians by seducing here. And that's his take, I think, on Noah, right? And over
is more a physical thing, but doesn't require the same engagement as